Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story so massive it honestly sounds like a sci-fi movie, but I promise you, it is 100% real. We're looking at how one single distant geological event nearly broke the entire 19th century world, bringing absolute climate chaos, desperation, and, well, ultimately some world-changing innovations. Okay, let's start with a quick thought experiment. What if winter arrived in July? Just imagine stepping outside in June of 1816, in a major, bustling city like New York or London. You're completely expecting that nice, familiar early summer warmth to hit your face. Instead, you get hit by a biting, freezing wind. By July, the rivers you rely on are completely frozen over. By August, there's literally snow falling in the streets. So that whole expectation of a normal summer, the warm picnics, the bright sunny days, the bountiful harvests, it was utterly shattered. Instead, this dark, brownish veil just parked itself over the northern hemisphere. Crops rotted in the fields, livestock starved, and the sun was just hidden, stuck behind this bizarre, lingering haze. It was an apocalyptic scenario. People were rioting in the streets, literally just to get a loaf of bread. The desperation was so intense and the trauma so widespread that 1816 earned a pretty chilling nickname, 1800 and froze to death. Today, history more commonly remembers it as the year without a summer. But what actually caused the sky to go dark in the first place? Well, to find the culprit, we have to travel halfway across the globe to modern-day Indonesia. The date is April 1815, and Mount Tambora was waking up. And guys, this wasn't just your standard volcanic eruption. This was a terrifying explosion on a scale that's honestly hard for us to even wrap our heads around today. To give you a real sense of scale for the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history, the blast was so unbelievably loud that sound waves traveled 1,600 miles away. 1,600 miles. That is exactly like standing in New York City and hearing a mountain explode in Denver. And the physical debris it expelled? Completely mind-boggling. The mountain violently launched an unimaginable 40 cubic miles of ash and rock straight up into the atmosphere. That is enough material to bury entire nations. But as horrific as the ash and lava were for the local population, that's not actually what triggered a global winter. Right, so here is where the real danger kicked in. It wasn't the falling rocks, it was the sulfur dioxide. Millions of tons of this stuff were injected straight into the stratosphere, where it mixed with water. This kicked off a massive chemical chain reaction, creating a global veil of sulfuric acid aerosols that completely wrapped around the Earth. Basically, this fatal chemical veil acted exactly like a giant mirror in the sky, bouncing the sun's warmth and light straight back out into space. And the result of that giant atmospheric mirror? Earth's average temperature dropped by about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I know what you're thinking. A 3-degree drop sounds tiny. Today, we'd barely even change our outfits for a 3-degree shift. But in the highly fragile, hyper-weather-dependent agricultural world of the 19th century, it was catastrophic. It was literally the difference between life and death for millions of people. So you can see how this rapidly escalated from a localized tropical event into a total global catastrophe. By the summer of 1816, just a year after Tambora blew, the sun was hidden and the entire global food chain had collapsed. And sadly, the horror didn't stop at starvation. The bizarre, altered weather patterns over the next few years actually sparked the first global cholera pandemic. This disaster hit different regions in wildly different but equally devastating ways. Over in Europe, mass panic set in as the prices for wheat and oats just absolutely skyrocketed. Up in New England, crops simply froze solid and died right in the fields. But over in India, specifically the Ganges Delta, the altered climate triggered a totally different nightmare, a massive disease outbreak. It was a time of pure, unchecked global chaos. The environmental disaster caused massive flooding in some parts of the world, while leaving huge pools of stagnant water in others. Famine was already severely weakening the global population, and those pools of stagnant water, they created the absolute perfect breeding ground for a secondary biological crisis to explode. Enter our microscopic culprit, Vibrio cholerae. Now, this bacteria had mostly been contained locally before all this, but it rapidly multiplied in that bizarre 1816 climate anomaly. And because global trade ships ironically kept right on moving despite the apocalyptic weather, the bacteria just hitched a ride. It launched the first global cholera pandemic, which ended up killing millions across Asia, Europe, and the Americas over the decades that followed.
Okay, so at this point, the world is freezing, starving, and sick. It sounds completely hopeless, right? Well, human beings are incredibly adaptable creatures. Out of all this utter misery, out of the darkness and the cold, came two massive, completely unexpected leaps forward for humanity.
It's just fascinating how a single, devastating global disaster accidentally birthed two wildly different innovations that we still rely on today. On one hand, in a gloomy, rain-soaked Switzerland, we get the birth of the modern horror genre. On the other hand, in a starving Germany, we get the invention of human-powered transit. Two completely brilliant, totally different responses to the exact same global crisis.
Let's set the scene for the first one, a gloomy Swiss villa near Lake Geneva. You've got a group of young writers, including Lord Byron, and an 18-year-old girl named Mary Shelley, stuck on vacation. The volcanic winter had trapped them entirely indoors. It was freezing, constantly raining, and pitch black outside. So to pass the time in this apocalyptic gloom, they held a ghost story contest. And that's when Mary Shelley had a terrifying waking dream about a horrified scientist creating life.
She immediately wrote that story down. And of course, that story was Frankenstein. The gloomy, apocalyptic weather of 1816 directly birthed one of the most famous monsters in literary history. It's wild to think about, but this catastrophic volcanic winter was the direct catalyst for the modern science fiction and horror genres. I mean, if the sun had actually been shining that summer, Mary Shelley probably would have just gone for a walk by the lake.
Meanwhile, this exact same climate crisis triggered a totally different chain reaction over in Germany. The volcanic winter caused oat crops to completely fail, and without oats, horses either starved to death or had to be slaughtered for food. As a result, traditional horse-drawn transportation utterly collapsed. People literally couldn't get around, which forced a desperate German inventor named Carl Dries to improvise and build a wooden, human-powered vehicle.
He called his invention the loaf machine, or running machine. It was basically a two-wheeled, steerable wooden frame that you propelled just by pushing your feet against the ground. Today, obviously, we know this incredible invention as the bicycle. The tragic loss of the world's primary transit animal inadvertently gave birth to a totally new, enduring form of human-powered transportation.
We so often look at history as just a series of isolated events, right? A war over here, or a random invention there, or a natural disaster somewhere else. But this incredible story is the ultimate butterfly effect. It shows us just how deeply and intricately connected our entire world truly is.
It really all boils down to this unbelievable domino effect. A mountain exploded in Indonesia, and it changed the weather in New York, sparked a pandemic in India, inspired a teenage girl to write a monster in Switzerland, and forced an inventor to build a bicycle in Germany. It's an incredible path tracking straight from a tropical volcano all the way to global cultural and technological revolutions.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to ponder. If human ingenuity found a way forward in the absolute darkest, coldest of winters back in 1816, what incredible modern innovations might be hiding in the crises we're facing today? As we tackle our own modern global challenges, it's really inspiring to think about what adaptations we might be on the brink of discovering right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And remember, keep looking for those silver linings.